Just yes or no, would you wear the T-shirt that the category you were put in, Mary Margaret?
I'd wear a completely different colour to any shirt on offer.
And Chris?
Brilliant answer. I follow the lead.
Chris Finlayson, thank you very much. Mary Margaret Slick.
Great to talk to you.
Thank you very much. On the panel this afternoon, we're coming up to it's about 1 minute to 5, coming up to the news, and then Lisa Owen with Checkpoint. Thank you for joining us. Good afternoon.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere ake nei, form an orderly queue. The government reveals more details of its self-isolation trial. But don't put your hand up yet. You can express interest from Thursday, and it's capped to 150 people. Entrepreneur Sir Ian Taylor reckons right now MIQ is more dangerous to business than COVID. He joins us with his own proposal, and he's ready to go now. COVID testing vans go door to door in Auckland. Our biggest concert venue says it needs vaccination rates to hit 90% to stay viable. But despite COVID, Auckland is apparently still paradise city for Guns N' Roses. Sorry, Dunedin. And speaking of rock and roll, we'll have the latest political poll.
Ahi Mari e RNZ News at 5. Ko Sarah Thompson tōku ingoa. A pilot that will allow those travelling overseas for business to forego MIQ and isolate at home will be open for expressions of interest on Thursday. The government has announced the trial will be capped at 150 people and limited to those needing to travel for work purposes or on government business. The COVID-19 Response Minister Chris Hipkins will give further details on the pilot on Wednesday. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says the pilot is in preparation for a highly vaccinated domestic population.
So that's why it's being done on a small scale. We are still vaccinating, but the intention is in the first quarter of 2022, when more New Zealanders are vaccinated, it will be safer to run self-isolation at home.
Jacinda Ardern says businesses which apply must have their staff arrive between October 30 and December 8th. The Director General of Health says the COVID case numbers are moving in the right direction and the country is making progress. Cases have been fluctuating over the last few weeks, from as high as 33 to as low as 9. But Ashley Bloomfield says in the past 3 weeks, the average daily number of cases has fallen each week from 19 to 17 to 15. He says most clusters are contained and there are just 4 active clusters where unknown cases are emerging. There were 12 cases today. An investigation has begun into why some police officers were not wearing full personal protective equipment when they arrested a woman who later tested positive for COVID-19. The woman was arrested last Thursday on suspicion of burglary and breaching bail. She did not have any symptoms and went through a health screening at the Waitakere Station Custody Unit in Auckland. Corrections advised the police about a positive result yesterday, forcing the unit to close and 13 police officers to self-isolate and test. Inspector Jason Edwards says some staff were not complying with strict guidelines to wear PPE at all times during arrests. Eden Park says it'll struggle to hold any events if vaccination rates in Auckland do not climb to around 90%. The park's just secured American rockers Guns N' Roses for a rare concert at the country's stadium next December. But Mr Sortner says unless vaccination rates climb, the park could find itself struggling financially.
We understand that without vaccination at a level, whether it be 80 or 90%, it's going to be very difficult for us to hold events. And without events, our commercial viability is compromised. So we're encouraging everyone to go out, get vaccinated and be part of the future of the park. And without vaccination, it's going to be very difficult for us to operate.
Eden Park is not committed to a no-vax, no-entry policy, but Mr Sortner says bands and promoters may make it a requirement before booking venues. You can hear more on this story in Checkpoint shortly. A Cambridge man accused of falsifying a text to state he was COVID-19 positive made his first appearance in Hamilton District Court today. Devon Stock, aged 27, was charged with editing an official text message which said he returned a negative COVID-19 result. The man then contacted a number of people, informing them he had returned a positive test. He was on remand on bail without plea and will reappear next month. The government's plans to transfer control of water infrastructure from councils to a new agency took another blow today. The proposal has already been rejected by the country's largest council, Auckland, and this morning the next largest one, Christchurch, formally registered its disapproval. Councillor James Goff described it as asset theft.
The government doesn't take over capital programs for street renewals in every town and city in New Zealand because that would be absurd. NZTA partners with local authorities to ensure roading networks are upgraded by the communities for the communities.
James Goff says while the changes might be of some benefit to smaller councils struggling to pay for much-needed sewerage upgrades, Christchurch was fine on its own. Whangarei district councillors today also supported opting out of the reforms. It's 4 minutes past 5. Moving now into sports news, the All Whites coach Danny Hay feels betrayed and has labelled Gianni Stensness' decision to switch allegiance to Australia as a kick in the guts. Stensness played for New Zealand at the Tokyo Olympics but has made himself unavailable for the All Whites matches against Curaçao and Bahrain in October. Hay says it's disappointing Stensness didn't let him know of his plans ahead of the Games.
I'm not going to lie, it's disappointing. It was certainly a bit of a kick in the guts and probably more of a kick in the guts for his teammates that he worked with in Japan. Look, he's made that decision. It's disappointing, but it's certainly not a critical loss for us because we do have a lot of depth in the central defensive position.
No New Zealand or Australian-based players have been included due to COVID-19 travel restrictions on returning to both countries. Defending IndyCar champion Scott Dixon's finished third in the final race of the year at Long Beach in California, ending the season fourth in the championship. Dixon's Chip Ganassi teammate Alex Palou won the title following his fourth place finish. Scott McLaughlin was 11th in the race and won the Rookie of the Year award. The United States have regained golf's Ryder Cup with a 19-9 point win over Europe at Whistling Straits in Wisconsin. And finally, the New Zealand tennis player Erin Routliffe and her American partner have been beaten in the doubles final at the WTA 500 tournament in the Czech Republic. Routliffe will climb 12 places to 55th in the world doubles rankings. And that's the news.
Sick of virus rule breakers?
To see people converging at such numbers, I find it very hard to watch.
Sir John Key makes a COVID comeback.
Bluntly, the government has not had a plan, and they actually do not have a plan that they can communicate to New Zealand about when we're going to open.
Are we a smug hermit kingdom?
I was wondering whether or not you were going to introduce me as the military leader of the hermit kingdom.
The only transmission you need. Morning reports, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
Te reo irirangi o Aotearoa, funded through New Zealand On Air. Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight to Tuesday. Northland south to Taranaki, Taumaranui, Taupo and Bay of Plenty. Long fine periods, isolated showers, possibly heavy tomorrow morning or afternoon. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Whanganui and Taihape will see showers turning to rain from this evening with snow to 700 metres tonight, becoming fine tomorrow evening. Manawatu, Horowhenua and the Kapiti Coast will see cloudy periods and the odd shower, clearing to fine tomorrow morning. Wellington and Wairarapa will have periods of rain, heavy at times, clearing to fine from tomorrow morning. Bulla, Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury will see scattered showers, possibly heavy in Bulla this afternoon and evening, clearing to fine. Frosts tomorrow morning. Otago, Southland and Fiordland will be fine with morning frosts, showers in Fiordland and coastal Southland from tonight and possibility elsewhere tomorrow afternoon. And for the Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy, rain from late tonight, becoming showers late tomorrow. That concludes the short forecast from Met Service to midnight to Tuesday. It's 7 minutes past 5.
Nā mihi Sarah, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Home isolation is coming, but not quite yet, and it's just for a select few. The Prime Minister floated the idea of a self-isolation pilot in August, saying it would begin in October. Today, she's announced full details of the scheme are coming on Wednesday, and expressions of interest will open from Thursday.
The self-isolation pilot will be capped at 150 people and focus on businesses and employees who are required to travel internationally for work purposes. There'll be a small number of government officials, but the vast majority will be from the private sector. Those in the pilot must be New Zealand citizens and residents, and they must, of course, be fully vaccinated. Those interested in applying will need to arrive in New Zealand from the 30th of October until the 8th of December, with final travellers leaving self-isolation by the 22nd of December.
Jacinda Ardern says the pilot is in preparation for a highly vaccinated population.
So that's why it's being done on a small scale. We are still vaccinating, but the intention is in the first quarter of 2022, when more New Zealanders are vaccinated, it will be safer to run self-isolation at home.
The COVID-19 Response Minister, Chris Hipkins, joins me now. Tēnā koe e te minita.
Kia ora, Lisa.
So, I imagine this is going to be oversubscribed, right? So what are the criteria going to be for assessing the need of the companies to be part of this?
Well, ultimately, we'll be looking for a good spread across the dates of the pilot. We'll be looking for a good mix of different, potentially different arrangements to make sure that we're doing what we're aiming to do here, which is to test out different options, to test out different approaches, so that we can see what works, so that we can see what the challenges are associated with that, so that we can be in a position early next year to say, look, these are the things that work, these are the things that we know we can do more of, these are the things we still need to do more work on.
In assessing the companies, are you going to take into account the value of the business they're doing?
Yes, of course, those are the sorts of things that people will put forward proposals based on. But I want to be clear here. We're talking about 150 people potentially. It's a pilot. It's really designed to make sure that we can get this right, because we know that there's massive demand there. We know we're going to need to do things differently early in the new part of the year next year, and so we want to make sure that we're getting all of those lessons on board as quickly as we can, so that we can then have border settings that allow a greater number of people to come in and to go out.
It's pretty small, right? As you point out, 150 people, and the Prime Minister has said there will be some government officials, MPs, in that mix. What percentage do you reckon are going to be taken up by MPs and government ministries?
Oh, very small. Actually, we want to make sure that we're bringing in, business people, that we're actually, it's a pilot, so we want this to be successful, but we also want to make sure that we're learning something from it. So we want to, be working with a variety of different types of people, different types of businesses and so on, so that we can, make sure that we're capturing all the information that we need.
So what is the criteria for assessing this? I mean, what does success look like?
Well, success looks like people safely returning back into the country, not bringing COVID-19 with them, not bringing it out into the community, not putting the community at undue risk. That's obviously the successful outcome we're looking for, because, we do want to be in a position to be able to do more of this.
So what sort of monitoring are you going to have of these people?
We'll be finalising and releasing more details on that in due course. It's likely to be, again, we're looking at something that we can scale, so something that we can do more of. Smartphone technology provides us with some tools, and so we're likely to be drawing on those in particular.
So, Minister, are you going to ask people, they're going to have to commit to being tracked, per se, by some kind of device, whether it's their cell phone or something else?
Yeah, smartphone technology is probably the less threatening of that compared to other options like an ankle bracelet or something. But a smartphone that has GPS enabled might also have some form of face recognition or whatever, so that you can be sure that the person who's carrying the phone is the person who's supposed to be. Those sorts of things. So those are the technology options that we'll work through.
So the Prime Minister has said this is basically a blueprint that potentially you're going to use in the future for wider groups, right, as more of us become vaccinated. I see in some of the lists of the criteria is that you have to have separate premises. You can't isolate with anyone else, which makes sense, but no shared ventilation. So that means no apartments, I assume, and therefore people will have to, be in a category where they have another residence, won't they?
It would depend on the nature of the apartments and what the ventilation systems in the apartments are. And so, the people who are putting forward those isolation plans will need to provide that information. But, people who are going to a standalone home, for example, where it's not attached to another home, doesn't share ventilation with another home, those are the sorts of, and they're going to be staying there by themselves. That clearly, ticks all of the boxes. There'll be other arrangements potential in there as well. That's what this process is designed to test out.
So potentially could people come to a family home and just stay in a wing of it in the future?
If they could clearly demonstrate that wing of the home was sufficiently large that it could be completely self-contained, and that they wouldn't need to come into contact with other people or share the airspace of those other people, then that may well be a possibility.
So it's pretty limiting then from what you were saying. Even as a future blueprint, it is very limiting and potentially only wealthier individuals may be able to participate.
It starts small, it starts quite narrow and quite restrictive, but of course, over time, higher rates of vaccination means that, we can expand those settings a little, more and more as more people are vaccinated, and as we find that it's safer and safer to do that. So yes, it is starting small because at this point we're still at a very low risk environment. We still have a very low appetite for risk, but as we get into a higher, proportion of the population being vaccinated, as the risk of COVID-19 poses is reduced through vaccination, then potentially the level of risk that we can tolerate at the border, it's still going to be low, but it might not have to be as absolutely low as it is now.
So the last people in this pilot will get out of their self-isolation on the 22nd of December. So, that potentially means that there's going to be no uptake of this in a broader sense for several months. I mean, Parliament goes into recess. Normally the first date back is when you all head off to Ratana. When's that? February? So we're talking months before this actually swings into anything bigger, aren't we, Minister?
No, this is a live, real-time trial where we'll be collecting insights as we go along, and we'll be making decisions as we go along. We'll be capturing the lessons as we go along. We'll be planning for the next stages as we go along. We won't be doing the pilot, waiting to do an evaluation, and then several months later making decisions on that. We'll be making decisions as we go.
Okay, so when do you anticipate, let's assume for a minute that it goes swimmingly well, right? When is the first opportunity you think that you'd have to broaden it out to a bigger group if it goes well?
I mean, I can talk about some of the things that we could look to see early in the new year. So we could look to see more people isolating at home. We could also be looking at other isolation arrangements next year that haven't been on the table up until now because we've basically had everybody in government-run MIQ facilities. But some of those things around bespoke MIQ arrangements, which haven't been options up till now, they may well become options early in the first part of next year.
So first part, Minister, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but people will be, straining to hear what month you're talking about here. So when you say first part, do you mean January, February?
Oh, I mean, and certainly in the first quarter of next year. We'll be certainly aiming to give people more of an indication as this pilot goes along about what's working and what they can expect to see early next year. Yes.
Let's move on to Auckland and the fact that we're still in level 3 here. October 4th is when you're going to reassess the situation. That is already into the school holidays, right? So can you give Aucklanders, please, an indication of whether they should cancel any trips they've got planned at the moment? Will you allow them to travel outside of Auckland, even if we move to level 2 during that time?
Look, decisions haven't been taken on that, and I don't want to get ahead of the decisions that may be taken. I'm feeling optimistic about the fact that the case numbers are continuing to trend down, that we're continuing to see them quickly linked, that we are seeing fewer outside of the home exposures. Those are all good and encouraging trends, but it is still too early at this point to be crystal ball gazing about what the future decisions might be.
Okay, I'm not asking you to call it. I'm just asking you to give a general direction here. With so many experts saying Auckland is on a knife edge, do you envisage a level 2 where people would be immediately able to leave the region freely without internal border checks, and they could pack their bags and head off to Queenstown? Would that be a given if we went to level 2, or is it possible we could have a modified level 2 that confines people to the Auckland region? Is that still on the table?
At this point, I wouldn't want to rule things in and out. What you've seen previously is sometimes we've been able to move quickly with alert level changes. Other times we've stepped down through alert level changes. So we've foreshadowed what's happening and then progressively moved towards that. And I wouldn't want to draw a line in the sand either way on what we might do in Auckland at this point. There's still a bit of water to flow under the bridge before we make those decisions.
Okay, Auckland vaccination rates around 82%. What's the breakdown for? That's across the board though, like an average. So what's the deal for Pacifica and Māori? How are those rates tracking?
I don't have the numbers for Auckland. I've got the numbers, the nationwide numbers, and they're looking better. So about 310,000 Māori first doses, about 158,000 second doses, about 201,000 for Pacific people, and about 111,000 second doses there. And that's out of if we look at the population who have had doses so far, it's a 3.2 2 million people who have had at least one dose so far. So we're seeing the numbers of Māori and Pacific people going up. Māori in particular, big uptick in numbers there over the last two and a half weeks. So that's encouraging.
If they don't get up to that 90%, which the Prime Minister has indicated, in the Auckland area, could that stop Auckland from shifting down a level?
Look, we've still got a big hill ahead of us to climb, but what we're seeing is good numbers of people coming forward to be vaccinated. We have seen an uptick in those Māori and Pacifica numbers over the last couple of weeks. That's really encouraging. My message is, keep coming forward. The 90% numbers, we've never set that as a hard and fast rule by government. Others have.
But it's a carrot, Minister. It's a carrot.
Absolutely. Look, it's something that we should all be working towards. But as I've always said, the number of who make up the unvaccinated population does matter. And so we will be looking at that. For example, if they're concentrated in particular geographical areas, if they're concentrated in particular communities, then that does create a risk, because if COVID makes it into those areas, then it can spread quite rapidly.
Thank you for your time this evening. That is the COVID-19 Response Minister, Chris Hipkins. It is 19 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Kia ora rawatu mo te whakarongo mai e haere aki nei. Coming up, Sir Ian Taylor offers up his alternative isolation pilot plan and he's ready to go now. Eden Park says it'll struggle to stay commercially viable if vaccination rates in Auckland don't get close to 90%. As the prospect of summer crowds and concerts draw closer, major events are mulling how to keep punters COVID-19 free. For now, the country's largest ground has stopped short of saying it'll require proof of vaccination before entry, but it says promoters looking to use their venues may have rules of their own. Our reporter Nick Trubridge and cameraman Nick Monroe have the story.
Ticket, please, and can I see your vaccine passport? Is this what's set to greet you at the gates of Eden Park as fans fill a Friday night T20? Will it be the request as you bop your way into that summer festival? For these Aucklanders, starved of a band at the pub, let alone a cricket game or a concert, the answer is it should be.
I'm involved in music myself, and for a lot of musicians and people who organise big events, I mean, they've got no work on. It's a very difficult time for them. So if people did have those passports, I think it would open it up a lot more. Yeah. So that's why I think it's a good idea.
I am a nurse and I have lots of friends that have also been nursing overseas in the COVID pandemic, and they've just spoken about how horrific it is and how busy they've been and how it's a horrible death. So I think if you can prevent it, let's prevent it and make it safe for everybody.
Very good idea. Very good idea. You want to know that the people there are not contaminating or spreading. It's pretty basic, pretty simple, really.
But what about the big players? Will they say no passport, no play? Eden Park's spent the day in the headlines. It snagged Guns N' Roses for a rare concert at the ground next December.
I'm sitting at the stands here at Eden Park and it's pretty empty. There's no one here. In fact, it's been this way since Auckland re-entered lockdown. All events that were planned were cancelled. But fast forward to December 2022, rock and roll fans will be sitting in these seats, jamming out to Guns N' Roses. It'll be cricket season then, so they might come back for some Black Caps games as well. But how do they know they're going to be safe? Will they, for instance, have to give a vaccine passport when they hand that ticket over?
While Eden Park hasn't announced a blanket no-vax, no-entry policy, Chief Executive Nick Sautner indicated it may be a requirement for some promoters before booking venues.
With regard to vaccination, we're taking guidance from central government. We have taken a leadership role in relation to promoting vaccination and being part of the solution. We have seen both internationally, there's been discussions around whether it be a promoter or a band saying without a vaccination, we're not permitting you to that event or that concert. So we're in dialogue with the industry but also with promoters around what their position will be.
But one thing's for certain, low vaccination rates paired with continued time outside level 1 will cripple Eden Park.
We understand that without vaccination at a level, whether it be 80 or 90%, it's going to be very difficult for us to hold events. And without events, our commercial viability is compromised. So we're encouraging everyone to go out, get vaccinated and be part of the future of the park. And without vaccination, it's going to be very difficult for us to operate.
Got no inside words, so we're waiting with bated breath. But we're looking for a bit of direction on how mass events could take place. There's been obviously a lot of chat around vaccinations, and we're looking into our network throughout the world to see how events are taking place within the vaccination mandate, and it's certainly something we'll explore once we get direction on how it will be achieved.
As for passports, Mr Pinkham says it's not on the cards yet, but he has a message for festival goers.
Still waiting on a bit of direction on how that will be implemented, but we're certainly supportive of vaccinations. We're encouraging our punters to get vaccinated and support the government initiatives, and hopefully we can get back to live events soon.
COVID-19 Response Minister Chris Hipkins told Checkpoint a downloadable vaccination certificate should be available to Kiwis in the coming weeks. Major event holders left mulling whether they'll require passport to party.
Ho mai o whakaro, we'd love your feedback on that. Nō reira anei na kaupapa mo te hōtaka nei. Do you reckon people should have to be double vaccinated to get into large events this summer? Would you be prepared to carry a certificate to prove you had been? Let us know your thoughts. Also on home isolation, so a trial starting, expressions of interest for business only at this stage, about 150 of them, so pretty small trial. Let us know your thoughts. Pātui mai, text me on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. The South Island hasn't had a case of COVID-19 in the community for more than a year. Despite that, they woke today to news that another big event has been canned. Guns N' Roses called off their November tour, rescheduling it until December next year, but with no Dunedin show. Our Otago Southland reporter Timothy Brown has more.
Whether it's cold November rain or Paradise City, depending on the day, Otipoti can offer either or sometimes both. But when Guns N' Roses finally make their way to Aotearoa in December next year, they'll instead be welcomed to the concrete jungle of Auckland. Dunedin venue's boss, Terry Davies, says it's the latest blow in what's been a tough 18 months for events organisers in the south. The cancellation comes just 2 days after Dunedin was meant to host the 100th game between the All Blacks and Springboks, which instead went down in Townsville in North Queensland.
Yeah, brutal. It's been a pretty traumatic 18 months, but especially on the back of two major shows that sold incredibly well. We know South Africa was sold out. And, you know, it's not just about sold-out stadium, it's the impact that a major event has on the city and the region.
Mr Davies says he's philosophical about the situation, even though the South Island has been COVID-free for months.
It's been a brutal week for us from a scheduling point of view and losing content. It's brutal from the fact that it'd be great to be level one, so we're hindered. But all of this stuff is out of, we can't control that.
Terry Davies says there's so much uncertainty for events organisers at the moment, he still has nerves about the Women's Cricket World Cup, which has 3 matches set down for Dunedin's University Oval in March. But it's the reality for events organisers around the South Island. From small community events to the biggest rugby game for the island probably since the 2011 World Cup, things are getting chopped, changed and cut. Word Christchurch Programme Co-Director Nick Lowe says their festival had to be postponed at the last minute when the Delta outbreak emerged last month.
Major disruptions for us. We've had our August festival postponed. We had 86 events, about 150 writers all lined up and ready to go. Publicity all out, ticket sales booming. And then boom, 2 weeks before we go into lockdown, we have to pull the plug on the whole thing.
As a result, they've lost some events from the November schedule, but they're ready to go ahead, even in level 2 or above.
I'm currently looking at a whiteboard with 6 different scenarios on it. If you imagine a kind of complex flow diagram of what happens if we go into this alert level down here in Te Waipounamu in the South Island, but North Island or Auckland is in a different level, as in lockdowns, and we're planning for every eventuality. But the guts bit is that we're going to go ahead no matter what.
And they've come up with ingenious ways of overcoming the border restrictions. Large digital screens in pubs will allow small numbers of festival goers the opportunity to have conversations with their favourite international authors. However, there is acceptance around the South about the need for restrictions to keep COVID out. But as vaccination rates increase and one eye turns to summer, Ignite Wanaka's Naomi Lindsay says businesses want a plan for the end game.
What I think the Chambers of Commerce network will be looking for summer is just some really good controls around events so that they can still go ahead. But for example, in the UK, you want to go to a football match or a concert, they're all going ahead, but you have to provide your scan code that you've been vaccinated, and also you have to have a swab test before you enter. We're really wanting to see something like that for the likes of Rhythm and Alps and Warbirds over Wanaka.
Events organisers across the South Island want to know the government's plan so they can start looking forward with some certainty.
It is 29 minutes past 5. Kia mau tonu mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. The former Ports of Auckland boss brought in lawyers to negotiate his exit payout of nearly $1 million. But any details as to why he was given the money remain under wraps. Auckland's Mayor Phil Goff is furious about the amount of money dished out to Tony Gibson and demanded a please explain from the board. But that explanation has failed to ease tensions, with Goff saying it cannot be justified. Anei te kai reporter, Nita Blake Person.
When the Ports of Auckland was sentenced last year over an accident which killed stevedore Laboom Dyer, the company was fined $540,000 and ordered to pay $136,000 in reparations. When the port's boss, Tony Gibson, resigned this year, he received nearly $1 million on his way out.
Ridiculous. I think that's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, they didn't even pay that for my brother's death. I don't see how they could argue that Tony deserves that kind of payout when he was, he's getting paid out because of the death, isn't he?
That's Laboom Dyer's brother Tua. He used to work at the Ports of Auckland too, but quit after another fatal workplace injury last year. It was the third death linked to the ports during Tony Gibson's time as chief executive.
They've clearly had the money to pay more or provide more support financially to the families, and they just didn't. I mean, they clearly have the money. They're able to pay him out $1.8 million. I mean, not even a fraction of that really went to the family.
Tony Gibson was paid around $820,000 a year. According to the port's latest annual report, he received between $1.78 million and $1.79 million when he left. When the payout was revealed earlier this month, Auckland Mayor Phil Goff wrote to the port's chairman, Bill Osborne, asking for an explanation. Checkpoint has received a copy of his response. In it, Osborne says he's constrained by what can be disclosed due to legal obligations. His words are voiced here.
It was a negotiated outcome. Both Ports of Auckland Limited and Mr Gibson had their own legal representation throughout the process, and each party was advised as to their position given the employment contract in place with Mr Gibson.
But ultimately, the board agreed to the final figure.
Given the importance and sensitivities of the matter, the decision was made by the board rather than its remuneration committee. The detailed negotiations were conducted under board delegation, and the board approved the final arrangements.
In a statement this afternoon, Phil Goff says he's strongly opposed to the level of payment made to Gibson, and that while the board has the legal power to make the payment, he did not believe it could be justified and says he should have been told. Bill Osborne is due to retire from the board at the end of the week, and the Mayor says he'll raise the issues with the new chair to make sure it's not repeated. Tua Dyer says the board should say why Mr Gibson was paid so much.
I don't see how they ended up on that figure. That's a gigantic amount of money. I mean, I don't see how his time there, considering he had 3 deaths on his time there, I don't see how that's worth the $1.8 million that they've paid him out now. I don't see how that happened. His actions have impacted, family, like people, the public, and they, the families don't even get to know why or what's happening. And they've always been so secretive and everything's so, under wraps, and no one really knows what's going on.
Tony Gibson is now facing 2 charges under the Health and Safety Act in relation to last year's fatal accident. The Ports of Auckland has also been charged. They will appear in court next month.
And that was reporter Nita Blake Person. E te iwi e haere ake nei I a Checkpoint entrepreneur Sir Ian Taylor with his own proposal for home isolation for businesses, what hospo providers think of a vaccine passport and how they want to see it enforced. And the government gets the thumbs down from another big council on water reforms. Homai o whakaro, I'd love your feedback on anything you've heard on the programme this evening. Let us know what you think of the home isolation trial for business, or whether you are for or against a vaccine passport. You know, no jab, no entry to big summer events. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or the email is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Anea Sarah Mina pita pita kōrero.
Kia ora, Lisa. RNZ News headlines, ko Sarah Thompson tōku ingoa. The government will accept a variety of business applicants for the self-isolation pilot so they can see what approaches work and what the challenges are. The pilot will be limited to 150 double-vaccinated people travelling on business, with expressions of interest opening from Thursday. The COVID-19 Response Minister Chris Hipkins told Checkpoint it's important to iron out any kinks ahead of potentially expanding the program early next year. He says tracking those in self-isolation may primarily involve GPS tracking via smartphone. The average daily number of new COVID cases has fallen in each of the last 3 weeks. Cases have been fluctuating from as high as 33 to as low as 9, but the average has decreased from 19 to 17 to 15. The Director General of Health says that means the Auckland outbreak is moving in the right direction. Ashley Bloomfield says most clusters are contained and there are just 4 active clusters where unknown cases are emerging. There were 12 cases today. The reasons for an exit payout of nearly $1 million to the former Ports of Auckland boss is shrouded in secrecy for legal reasons. Auckland's Mayor Phil Goff demanded answers from the Ports board after Tony Gibson's massive payout was revealed last month. Checkpoint has received a copy of the explanation he's been given. It states the figure was a negotiated outcome. But the Ports chair, Bill Osborne, has told Mr Goff he was legally constrained in what he could say about the payment. And finally, the government's plans to transfer control of water infrastructure from councils to a new agency is facing a strong current of opposition, with a number rejecting the move. The Christchurch Council registered its disapproval this morning, while Whangarei District councillors also supported opting out. Auckland Council has already rejected the proposal. Christchurch councillor James Goff described it as asset theft and said it will likely only benefit smaller councils. Those are your headlines. Our next news and sport update is at 6.
Thanks, Sarah. No mai hoki mai, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Ko taku hoa anai nei, ko Nona Peltier, who's here to talk business. Nona, a proposal to build the world's first large-scale green hydrogen plant in Southland has got some strong interest. Now, who is interested in it?
Well, I guess about last month we heard that Contact and Meridian Energy were going to investigate the establishment of a green hydrogen plant to take over when TY closed, or was supposed to close in 2024. And it's called the Southern Green Hydrogen Project. So what they did is they went out and asked for expressions of interest from all over the world, and they got 80 back. So they've got 80 different groups interested in taking part in whatever comes from that. We don't know yet. They're going to be looking at the proposals they've received. They're going to be looking at whether or not they can identify any potential partners in that. And then they're going to look at how they can finalize a plan. Now, they're looking at the end of March to kind of come up with something. And then they would put it in place by, say, 2025, with TY, the smelter there, expected to close in 2024. However, there's some question marks around that. We've talked about that before because of the stunning increase in the price of aluminium, making that smelter perhaps much more cost-effective, not just into 2024, but beyond. So we'll have to see what happens with that.
And let's move on to the specialty milk producer. This is Synlait, has a positive outlook after posting a disappointing full-year result. What are their numbers looking like?
Well, Synlait said they were going to post a loss for their full year, and they did. The loss was $28.5 million, and that was near the top of its forecast. And look, that compares with profit of $74 million the year earlier. And, you know, the company has reported a profit for about 9 years, so to have a loss was quite hard for it. Not surprising, though, given all the bad news associated with its biggest customer and also shareholder A2 Milk, which ran into trouble with its channel. It's called the Daigou channel, where Chinese visitors come and buy product and then take it home with them and then resell it in China. That accounted for a large part of the business. Synlait, of course, was benefiting from that. So A2 Milk's downturn was also Synlait's. It wasn't just that, though. There were other things that they did wrong. John Pino, who resumed the position of chief executive after departing, he had stepped down, a new person came in. Now he's taken it back up, but they have still since found a new chief executive to take over from him. They are really upbeat about the forecast for this full year coming, or the one that we're in now. However, they won't provide any numbers. So again, it's a watch this space sort of thing. However, the markets seem to like it because their share price rose 8% today on that outlook.
And they might not want to give you all the numbers, but you've got lots of numbers for us too.
I always do, yes. Yeah. So the local top 50 index, it rose, it fell 0.25%. A little bit wishful there, huh? 32-point drop to 13,228, and the New Zealand dollar is steady today after dropping just a little bit on Friday, late Friday, at 70.2 US cents, 96.4 Australian, and 51.3 pence.
Thanks, Nona. Ka kite. That was Nona Peltier with business news there. Right now, MIQ is a bigger risk to business than COVID-19, according to a leading entrepreneur who's detailed an alternative isolation plan in a bid to get businesses travelling again. The boss of animation research, Sir Ian Taylor, believes companies can be trusted to manage their own strict home isolation, freeing up spots in MIQ for other returning Kiwis. So Ian says companies have trimmed back, but some overseas travel is essential to keeping business ticking over. And he's been contacted by a list of businesses desperate for certainty around getting workers home. He's written a series of open letters to the government laying out a blow-by-blow pilot trip that he would be the guinea pig for. But so far, says he's had no real response from the government, and he didn't mince his words when I asked him to describe the current MIQ situation.
It's a disaster. I mean, it was ill-conceived from day one, and now it is just the biggest roadblock. For businesses, in fact, for a lot of people, MIQ's become more dangerous than COVID itself. And the thing that really concerns me is that, we saw last week that waiting room concept was always flawed inside a flawed system. And they even made an animation. I remember when Minister Hipkins showed it at the 1 o'clock press briefing or whatever it was, they actually had an animation to show how the waiting room worked. It had these little yellow figures coming into the waiting room, and I thought there's going to be a few more than that. But nobody has acknowledged that it simply highlighted how bad the system was.
How many staff have you got offshore at the moment with no means of getting them back?
3. We've got 3 at the moment. We talk about being kind. Those 3 have been absolutely essential to everyone keeping their job here. They all volunteered. They've all been overseas since Christmas. And what we normally did, because it's a tough job, it's a tough road to hoe over there. So what we used to do, they'd probably work for 2 months or so. Then we'd send somebody up to give them a break for a fortnight, bring them back. But we can't do that now. So these people have been there since Christmas. One of them, who's in the UK, called us up about 2 weeks ago and said he'd gone to his first dinner in a restaurant since Christmas. It's really, really tough. And we aren't asking to take up MIQ beds. I'd hate to do that. There are people even worse off than that. What we are asking is for the government to listen to us, and we can show them a way to ease the load on MIQs and bring our people home safely with certainty. We just cannot plan.
Do you absolutely need to travel? Have you cut it down to the most essential travel necessary?
I think every business has. Nobody actually wants to travel now. And so if I use our example, we built this remote system which we used on the Ryder Cup. Anyone who watched the Ryder Cup would have seen that remote system operating. Normally we'd have between 10 and 12 people over there at Whistling Straits. This time we had 1. We did all the rest from here. So we've reduced our overseas travel since March the 14th last year. We've reduced it by 80%. which is enormous. But the 20% that we need to make is what keeps the 80% of our business running. And we're not the only ones. So, I read an article today about, and people said, we've got Zoom, we've got this. Zoom has helped us with all of this reduction in travel, and it will change business travel forever, but it won't remove it. And at the moment, we actually can't do business because we just cannot afford to send somebody away and not know when they're coming back. I have a number of companies who sent me messages in the past week who have people have gone overseas, have had their meetings, and are now stuck and they don't know when they're coming home.
Let's talk about your idea for a trial, right? You'd be the guinea pig and the destination would be Australia, Sydney. So talk us through, what would you do in the week before you left?
Yeah, so, and it's quite a good one to choose because, we're relatively COVID-free and it's running rampant in Sydney. So we take it to the extreme, but these are the kind of systems we'd have in place. 7 days before I got on the plane, I would go into level 3, I'd work from home, I'd be tested every day. On day 1, I'd have a PCR test, the normal one, and then I would also have this portable device that's had $80 million spent on it, and it's just up the road here in Dunedin, and they can't talk to anyone about it. They're giving me one of those so I could compare my PCR test, which takes 25 minutes. So I'd go through that process, have another PCR test 3 days before I flew to Auckland. I'd fly to Auckland, where the Auckland airport said they'd meet me to make sure that I went through to the Air New Zealand area cleanly and safely. I'd take another test before I got on the plane, a fast test, a PCR test, which takes 25 minutes. I'd get on the plane, fly to Sydney. In Sydney, I'd be met by a driver from a hotel chain that does MIQs. I'd be tested there, go to the hotel, tested. They've offered to put me in a floor away from everyone else, serve me only with people who are double vaccinated. I'm double vaccinated, and with scarves. So I'd get meals delivered to my door in the mornings and at nights. And during the day, the same driver would take me down to Fox Studios, where I have to be tested, like all their staff, even to get in the front door. So that's where I'd have my meetings.
In the hotel in Sydney, would you be restricted to that hotel for a certain number of days, i.e. in isolation?
Yeah, that's what.
How many days?
Only now. It would be 2 weeks at the moment because they shut the border as well. Like if I was going to the States, there wouldn't be any. Once we're cleared, there wouldn't be any. But it's perfect. I would go there and I would spend 2 weeks in that hotel because that's the rules they've put in at their side. Yep. So I'd spend 2 weeks there and just do the yards, and then once that was over, I would pretend that I'd just flown in like normal business, and I'd take my trip, go to Fox, do my meetings there every day, being tested every day, PCR tested back in my hotel with my portable device, and then I'd fly back to New Zealand, come through the airport in Auckland, fly down to Dunedin, go into a self-isolation premises that we have here, and be there by myself for as long as the government wanted me to, 2 weeks. But we would show the steps we would go through that said 2 weeks is overkill. This guy, because what MIQ is meant to do is find people coming in that may have COVID. What we think we should be doing in the business world, we can help with this. We've got the technology, but the teams that travel are very small. They're between 1 and 5. So you could manage your own teams really easily, and then step it up to teams the size of the All Blacks, for example. They've got all their own medical staff. So if we gave them the latest testing kits while they're away before they came back, they could test as well, which means we don't have 40 or 50 All Blacks taking up really valuable MIQ spaces for people who simply don't have these resources.
So your private isolation on return would be a house or an apartment or something similar with just you in it?
Yeah, and it's total overkill. But again, what we're wanting to do this live every day, so we bring some transparency to this. Apparently there's some paper being written. They talked about it in August that they were going to look at how they could do this self-isolation. Now there's a paper being delivered. They'll have a look at that, and if we're lucky, they'll start doing a test by December. What the bench has done has come up with this idea with some big people backing us, and we've done it in a week. And all we're saying to the government is, let's do this publicly so everybody can see what works, what doesn't work, and how the future could look like.
Ian, if you're to do this, you need them to sign off on it, right? What do you reckon your chances are?
Well, I guess this will be the real test, because this isn't going to cost them any money at all. There are a number of significant organisations that have stepped up to help me. We will pay all our own costs. We've got all the safety protocols in place to be tested. So if they say no, then that really does raise the question of how serious are we about getting back to living with COVID. This is as safe as it goes. I'm double vaccinated, I'm tested every day, and there's only one of me. And then we see that system works. You know that you can use businesses 1 to 5 people doing the same system. Your business would have to be accredited, so you're held fully accountable. And I can hear people asking, how can we trust businesses? Well, actually, the businesses are the place you will trust the most, because it's absolutely essential to your accreditation that no one breaks the rules.
So Ian Taylor there, and some of you getting in touch already. This listener says Ian Taylor has some brilliant ideas, but keeping newly arrived business people in MIQ for just 5 days is insane. History shows many of our COVID positive returnees have become infected on their journey home in airports and on planes. Letting them go on day 5 is sending them out into the community just before they test positive and start infecting the community. On the other hand, this listener says, oh, for goodness sake, WA has been doing home isolation successfully for ages. Multiple exclamation marks. Our government don't need to do a pilot. Just get on with it. Keep your feedback coming. Text us on 2101. It is almost 10 to 6. I'm Lisa Owen, and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Hey, Muriaki no Pita Pita Kōrero. After the news at 6, the ups and downs of politics will have the latest poll ratings. As we look to the future of New Zealand's COVID-19 response, there's increasing talk about how businesses will deal with mixing the vaccinated with the unvaccinated. Maybe it's a vaccine passport, but there's questions about the legality of it and who'd hold responsibility, the government or businesses. Some of the big names in Wellington's hospitality scene are on the fence about it. Our reporter Jake McKee and cameraman Samuel Rillstone went to find out why.
It's not a yes or a no, more of a how would a vaccine passport actually work? While the idea has been floated for months now, these hospitality owners are sitting undecided while the waters are still muddied.
Look, I'm 50-50 at this stage. It's a really tough conversation to have.
I mean, you want to do what's best for people.
Bronwyn Kelly co-owns the Maranui Cafe and Queen Sally's Diamond Deli in Lyle Bay. She says she'd have no issue with the government mandating a vaccine passport, but the idea of having to enforce it herself leaves her with more questions, and she doesn't think many people in the hospitality sector would be on board with that.
And I do think that our staff are under so much stress anyway, that actually getting them to then monitor whether people have their passports is just taking it to a whole new level where I can imagine it being very stressful. And how do you tell a family that might come in that they can't come in if their daughter's not vaccinated?
Bronwyn Kelly wants to see more light at the end of the tunnel for businesses.
It does feel a lot at the moment like just seeing, you never know what the government's going to decide and whether we can get fully vaccinated enough. I mean, what does the future hold?
Matt McLaughlin, who owns the likes of Panhead, Tory Street and Moustache Bar in the city's entertainment district, is in a similar mindset. He recognises a vaccine passport is probably full of legal hurdles for officials if it was mandated, but he says it would make things easier for businesses.
We don't know whether we're going to be closed next week. We don't know whether we can order stock. We don't know whether we can employ more staff. We're really in no man's land. We're in complete limbo as an industry, and then to sort of chuck out there, hey, you've also got to make this decision going forward is just really difficult to do when we don't know what the bigger picture is going to look like.
Mr McLaughlin wants to see something more of a COVID-19 recovery roadmap.
If we had a really clear idea of where we're heading as a country and as an industry, that probably would make it a lot easier for us to make a decision on whether it's a decision that we think we should make.
Mr McLaughlin says it's tough to see a win-win situation for everyone. Epic Hospitality Director Greg Wilson supports the idea of a vaccine passport, whether it's mandated or not. He's in favour of it being mandated, but is prepared to implement it himself at a string of bars on Courtney Place and Dixon Street, the heart of Wellington's nightlife.
Everyone has to do their bit, otherwise we're going to be going around in circles, and COVID's going to be popping up around the country and holding the country back.
Even if vaccine passports weren't mandated, he'd like to see the government give a hand to those who want it.
I think if the government had some sort of system or some sort of app that was easy and it could easily be scanned at the door, or it could be easily shown across the bar to our bar staff, they could facilitate the system for us to easily enforce it. That could work.
Vaccine passport or not, there's one thing these hospitality heads all agree on. They want to see the vaccination rates keep rising so they get a better picture of the future.
And if you were listening to that piece, we'll put the video from Jake and Sam up on our Facebook page so you can check it out. And feedback on the prospect of a vaccine passport, you seem pretty positive about it. This listener says yes to a vaccination passport, double vax for all large gatherings. Another person says, yep, double vax, and then all my vulnerable friends can come with me. And another person says, defo, think that small and big venues should have a vaccine passport, 100% behind it. So mad at the anti-vaxxers. Keep it coming. Pātui mai, text me on 2101. The vaccine passport is an issue that's being mulled over across the Tasman too. For months, people in New South Wales and Victoria have been promised greater freedoms once 70% and then 80% of the population is fully vaccinated. In Victoria, some businesses in selected regional areas will be part of a trial for how they'll operate for fully vaccinated customers. The ABC's David Sparks has more.
For months we've been hearing how fully vaccinated people will be the first to benefit once lockdown states slowly begin to ease restrictions. And it's clear it'll be the people working in pubs, cafes, shops and other businesses who'll have to enforce the new rules.
It's a further impost on my staff and so forth, and to make sure that people are fully vaccinated. But I understand why the government are doing it.
Mark Vollard owns the Kilcunda pub on the Bass Coast, 100 kilometres south-east of Melbourne. He's allowed to open at the moment, but only on a very limited scale.
Oh, look, we're kind of getting used to it now, making sure that people are from regional Victoria. That's the main thing, but it's not ideal. But, I mean, I need to be open, and if that's what needs to happen to have my hotel open and trading, then I'll do it.
The Bass Coast is one of 6 regional areas that'll be testing how things should operate for fully vaccinated customers once 70% of Victorians over the age of 16 are double vaxxed, which should be late next month. The trials will begin on October the 11th and cover hospitality, hairdressing, beauty services and tourism businesses, with tests of smartphone apps and other procedures to figure out what works. At the Kilcunda pub, Mark Vollard reckons it's definitely a good move to test the technology before launching it statewide.
They've got to get the gremlins out of this thing, because seriously, I need to have the simplest and fastest way to validate people's vaccination status, because if I'm spending too long with each customer, it's just going to be too difficult.
Businesses in the council areas of Bull Oak, Pyrenees, Bass Coast, Greater Bendigo, East Gippsland and Warrnambool will be the first to be invited to take part in the trial. In New South Wales, Premier Gladys Berejiklian says she'll release full details of her state's freedom roadmap this week.
The government's plans to transfer control of water infrastructure from councils to a new agency took another blow today. The proposal has already been rejected by the country's largest council, Auckland, and this morning the next largest one, Christchurch, formally registered its disapproval. Conan Young reports.
Under the proposal, all 67 councils' drinking, waste and stormwater assets would be absorbed by 4 large regional entities. In return, the government is promising to pick up the tab for $180 billion worth of repairs and upgrades needed to this country's dilapidated water infrastructure. However, so far, 20 of those councils have said thanks, but no thanks. It's telling that even Labour's old mates, former Cabinet Ministers Phil Goff in Auckland and now Leanne Dalzell in Christchurch, are speaking out so strongly. Today, Mayor Dalzell told a full meeting of her council, called to approve its formal response to the changes, that Christchurch was in a good position to pay its own way.
Many councils are delivering high quality water services that comply with requirements, are monitored and managed by capable people, and subject to effective governance and decision-making processes. Christchurch is one of those councils.
The issue that matters the most to residents is removing the chlorine from their otherwise pristine artesian water, something the council is continuing to spend a lot of time and money on. But Ms Dalzell says as it currently stands, the proposal provides no guarantees this work will continue, potentially leaving a bad taste in everybody's mouths.
The model has stripped all councils and thus our communities of the control of and decision-making about our Three Waters assets, regardless of the standards they're either meeting or capable of meeting in the future.
Unity is not something that's normally seen around the council table these days, but the government's water reforms have seen a form of perestroika breakout between the left and right factions, with unanimous opposition expressed by all today. James Goff described it as asset theft.
The government doesn't take over capital programs for street renewals in every town and city in New Zealand because that would be absurd. NZTA partners with local authorities to ensure roading networks are upgraded by the communities for the communities.
Councillor Goff says while the changes might be of some benefit to smaller councils struggling to pay for much needed sewerage upgrades, Christchurch was fine on its own.
Frankly, this potential asset larceny would break what's largely already fixed. Last year's Ministry of Health report shows almost 97% of the New Zealand population is receiving their drinking water from a fully compliant water supply. They're not drinking sludge like the condescending advertisements suggest.
Phil Major describes the proposal as a waste of everybody's time.
The government has certainly proven its need for change, and I would suggest they start with sacking their PR department, spin department, who spent millions of dollars creating a television ad which in my opinion was just rubbish and scaremongering.
Leanne Dalzell says she's worried about the prospect of the government ignoring the feedback from councils and pushing ahead with the changes anyway, and continues to hold out hope it will work collaboratively with them to come up with a better proposal. Minister for Local Government, Nanaia Mahuta, has been approached for comment.
And your feedback just before 6. Jeff says, had to have a vaccination certificate before I departed Auckland to travel overseas in 1976. Been there, did it.
Ahi Marie, RNZ News at 6. Ko Sarah Thompson, tōku ingoa. Returning New Zealanders taking part in a home isolation trial are likely to be monitored electronically to help ensure they are where they should be. The government will this week start accepting applications from companies who want travelling staff to take part in the trial, which is designed to see if home isolation is a safe alternative to managed isolation and quarantine hotels. The COVID-19 Recovery Minister Chris Hipkins has told Checkpoint there will have to be a form of monitoring which is likely to involve cell phones, possibly using facial recognition technology. Mr Hipkins says if MIQ alternatives are rolled out, they are likely to be in the first quarter of next year, but he can't be more specific. Business NZ says there is huge demand for those needing to travel overseas for work and then isolate at home upon their return. The trial is capped at 150 people and will be limited to those returning from a business trip between October 30th and December 8th. Business NZ Chief Executive Kirk Hope says businesses have been finding it hard to navigate the MIQ system, and the announcement is welcome.
We've had a huge amount of interest from within our own membership from large, medium and small businesses. So, hundreds and hundreds of businesses getting in contact to see if they can find out more details. So there is a high degree of interest.
The government will be announcing further details of the pilot on Wednesday. Seasonal workers from the Pacific will have to travel to New Zealand without having to go through managed isolation from next Monday. The RSE workers must have received at least one dose of a COVID-19 vaccine and will have to isolate at their place of work for 7 days. They will also undergo Day 0 and Day 5 tests. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says workers from Vanuatu can travel to New Zealand from October 4th, while those coming from Samoa and Tonga will arrive from the 12th.
Our intention remains to broaden eligibility for quarantine-free entry to New Zealand from these countries and Tokelau when we can be sure it is safe to do so, fully aware of how positive the scheme is for our Pacific neighbours.
Jacinda Ardern says starting with RSE workers allows the government to trial the pseudo form of isolation. The Director General of Health says about 45 or 50 more cases are expected from the 4 most active clusters in Auckland's COVID-19 outbreak. Ashley Bloomfield says most of the public health effort is now focusing on controlling the 4 clusters, which have been the source of most of the unexpected cases of COVID that are still emerging. He says the group is almost like a separate outbreak. On average, every person with COVID in the group will infect one other, which is much higher than other clusters. There are 12 new cases of COVID-19 in the community today, all based in Tāmaki Makaurau. Mobile COVID testers have gone to at least 2 suburbs in Auckland to offer door-to-door testing to try and find any remaining cases. There are 6 suburbs of particular interest: Mangere, Whāwona, Ōtara, Manurewa and Mount Wellington Sylvia Park. Dr Bloomfield says people have been willing to be tested at their doorsteps.
There was certainly work done in Clover Park last week as part of or complementary to the wider testing that was happening there. I know there's another team's gone out into another suburb today to test some streets where there have been some cases located.
Positive case numbers have fallen in the last 3 weeks, from 19 on average each day to 17 to 15 in the last 7 days. The reasons for an exit payout of nearly $1 million to the former Ports of Auckland boss is shrouded in secrecy for legal reasons. Auckland's Mayor Phil Goff demanded answers from the Ports board after Tony Gibson's massive payout was revealed last month. Checkpoint has received a copy of the explanation he's been given. It states the figure was a negotiated outcome and the Ports and Mr Gibson both had their own legal representation throughout the process. But the Ports chair, Bill Osborne, has told Mr Goff he was legally constrained in what he could say about the payment. It's 4 minutes past 6. New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian has unveiled a 3-stage roadmap out of lockdown. For people who are fully vaccinated, stage 1 will be when the state is 70% double dosed, allowing pubs, restaurants, gyms and hairdressers to reopen. Under stage 2, when 80% are fully vaccinated, there will be further freedoms, including gatherings of up to 10 people in a home. Ms Berejiklian says the 3rd stage will allow the first freedoms for the unvaccinated.
And then on the 1st of December will be the final stage of reopening where unvaccinated people will be able to participate. Now, the only exception is that for places of worship at 80% double dose, unvaccinated people will be able to attend places of worship at 80% double dose, but that's it.
The state recorded 787 new community COVID cases today. Moving now into sports news, the All Blacks are calling on referees to stamp out deliberate delaying tactics in the wake of the side's narrow win over the Springboks at the weekend. Assistant coach John Plumtree says South Africa used injury treatment and other tactics to slow down Saturday's game in Townsville, which the All Blacks won by just 2 points. Plumtree says the tactics included an army of water carriers coming onto the field whenever one of the Springboks went down.
When the medics are coming on or water boys are coming on, the game just slowed down. So I'm pretty sure it's a tactic. No one wants to play a high-speed tempo game against us right now, and it's up to the officials to deal with that.
Meanwhile, South Africa have been crowned World 7 Series champions with victory in the final tournament in Canada. Olympic champions Fiji, New Zealand and Australia did not compete due to COVID constraints. All 4 Auckland and Northern District sides will miss the opening rounds of the domestic cricket season due to COVID lockdowns. The Plunket Shield will begin on October 23rd, but Auckland and Northern Districts will not join until November 7th. The women's competition will start on October 30th, but Auckland and Northern Districts will not join until November 6th. And finally, the Tall Ferns tip off their Asia Cup basketball campaign against South Korea in Jordan tonight. The New Zealand women need to finish in the top 4 to progress to next year's World Cup qualifiers. And that's the news.
Tonight on Night, Shahram Ariam takes us on another journey back to the Persian music of his homeland. Shannon Byrne looks back on a weekend of Australian sport, including the Aussie Rules Grand Final. And Mark Rogers is spinning discs on Nashville Babylon, including this one from Nancy Sinatra.
You keep saying you got something for me.
So join me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7.
Something you call love, but confess.
On RNZ National.
Te reo irirangi o Aotearoa, on air, online and on demand. Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight to Tuesday. Northland south to Taranaki, Taumaranui, Taupo and Bay of Plenty. Long, fine periods, isolated showers, possibly becoming heavy tomorrow morning or afternoon. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Whanganui and Taihape. Showers turning to rain from this evening with snow to 700 metres tonight, becoming fine tomorrow evening. Manawatu, Horowhenua and Kapiti Coast. Cloudy periods and the odd shower, clearing to fine tomorrow morning. Wellington and Wairarapa, periods of rain, heavy at times, clearing to fine from tomorrow morning. Buller, Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury will see scattered showers, possibly heavy in Buller this evening, clearing to fine. Frosts tomorrow morning. Otago, Southland and Fiordland will have fine weather with morning frost, showers in Fiordland and coastal Southland from tonight and possibly elsewhere tomorrow afternoon. And for the Chatham Islands, it'll be mostly cloudy with rain from late this evening, becoming showers late tomorrow. That concludes the short forecast from Met Service to midnight to Tuesday. It's 8 minutes past 6.
Kia ora rā e hoa, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Labour and National have both taken a hit in the latest One News Colmar Brunton poll, with the ACT Party proving the big winner. Tonight's poll puts Labour at 43%, down 3, and National at 26%, also down 3. ACT are at 14%, up 5 points. The Green Party on 8%, so no change there. As for preferred Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern is still in the lead on 44%. But she's down 4 points, with Judith Collins falling behind David Seymour, who is on 11%. Our political editor, Jane Patterson, joins me now from our Parliament studio. Jane, shall we start with, well, can we call them the losers? Judith Collins and the National Party. This is, well, the lowest she's gone in the preferred Prime Minister stakes since she took on the leadership, isn't it?
That's right, and these numbers are not where National would have been wanting to go. Now, Labour and National and New Zealand have been through a tough period with these lockdowns, but Labour can afford to lose a bit of support. National cannot afford to lose support, and as you see there in those preferred Prime Minister stakes as well, not only in the party vote, but Judith Collins as opposition leader has now been bypassed or passed by David Seymour. So in the position that she's at the moment, this is the worst kind of news for that party.
Yeah, and I mean, the obvious question here, Jane, sorry to ask you it again, is how long can she possibly stay on? Because obviously, you know, there was a lot of brouhaha over a quite aggressive interview she did at one point, pulling out of TV interviews, and now she's got a former Prime Minister, well, stealing her thunder, really. So how long can she hang in there?
Yeah, it's been a rough couple of weeks for Judith Collins, but really there are definitely active moves or talk about removing her as leader from, you know, a number of MPs who are very, very unhappy with her leadership, and also not just her performance, but the kind of culture that is in the caucus at the moment. There are two things really stopping any active move just right at the moment. The first is that the whole caucus is still separated. So while Auckland MPs are still under level 3 and unable to come down, there won't be any move to roll her. And the other thing that anyone you talk to in the National Party is so aware of is they shouldn't be talking about themselves in the middle of a pandemic. They're in this situation where they know they shouldn't be focusing on the leadership. The bad coverage and the skirmishes keep going, and they know themselves that that's not what the public wants to hear. So to top that off with a leadership contest, I think everyone recognises that that's probably not going to do them any favours. And actually, as Judith Collins has just told One News, there have been 4 leadership changes, and look where the party is now. So it's not necessarily the answer.
Yeah, so Judith Collins slipping almost into the margin of error for this poll. Jacinda Ardern and the Labour Party both down on both counts of preferred Prime Minister and the party ratings. 4%, reasonably significant drop. But will they be pleased with that, given these are tough times, as you point out?
Look, I don't know if they'd ever be pleased with a drop in the polls, and particularly to see the Prime Minister slipping as well. But as I said at the start, you know, they have a lot of room to come down and support a little bit, as I said, after a pretty hard time. And I think you're seeing public dissatisfaction, especially in Auckland with the lockdown restrictions, people really starting to push back against this lockdown. And, as this outbreak rolls on, I think that's a reflection of some of that drop in support. But look, it's certainly nowhere, it's not dangerous territory for Labour nor Jacinda Ardern. I think the thing that they will be looking at is that rise of ACT and how David Seymour's coming up. So even though Judith Collins and National is slipping down or not benefiting, it's a party on the other side that is coming up. It's not Labour that is benefiting from National's slide just at the moment.
Yeah, so is David Seymour the de facto opposition here now?
Well, he's been trying to make a good case for it. Of course, Judith Collins keeps insisting that she is the opposition leader. It is a formal title, the leader of the opposition. But, this is part of what the caucus is worried about. They see the traditional opposition party getting to the mid-20s, as Labour did in its crisis times before Jacinda Ardern took over, heading, into those mid-high 20s as danger territory. And in that case, there was the Greens alongside nipping at their heels. So it's very, very worrying for National to see their numbers continue to slide, and then it comes that question, is it more damaging to install a new leader, or is the damage going to be further wrought as the leadership stays in place? So, as I said, this ACT dynamic does not help their situation in the slightest.
We can't not talk about Simon Bridges. So obviously he is preferred Prime Minister stakes 2% here, right? So he is in the margin of error. How realistic would it be to think that the National Party would go back to the future with a leader too?
Well, this is the question too, and also so soon after an election loss. Like, who would actually want to take over at this stage of the game to get through, so many months to an election with all of the pitfalls that we have seen for an opposition leader? But really, Simon Bridges is the only person that's being talked about here. I've had conversations about his poor public polling, or the way that the people that he didn't really ever shine in those public performance ratings when he was a leader. And there's a bit of a belief that maybe he's a bit more relaxed now. He's maybe had a bit more rehabilitated in the eyes of the public, and also that he actually probably should have had a go. Again, this is the view of some of the caucus, that, he was shortchanged by not being able to have a run at the 2020 election, and maybe it's time to give him a shot. But as I said, the likes of Christopher Luxon, that is well into the future. I think at this stage he will be sitting, biding his time. I think at this point it is a very early time to be talking about changing the leader, especially they've already been through their roll call. But as I said, Simon Bridges, the only one realistically being talked about if there is a move. But even if we've seen over the weekend busily protesting that he doesn't want the job, so let's see how things pan out.
Good to talk to you, Jane. That's our political editor, Jane Patterson, joining us live there from our Parliament studio. For businesses, home isolation will be a game changer. Employees can get overseas and back without having to compete for a spot in MIQ. The government's revealed it will start a pilot scheme next month, capped at 150 people who must be citizens and fully vaccinated. The criteria will be announced on Wednesday, with expressions of interest opening on Thursday. Frost Fans, which provides equipment around the world to protect crops, is keen. CEO Andrew Priest joins me now. Hi, Andrew. Why would you be keen to get on this pilot?
Tēnā koe. Look, we're keen to be able to get overseas and see some of the distributors and customers that we've recently appointed, and haven't really been able to have the chance to do that over the last 12 months or so.
And what makes you think you guys would be a strong contender? Because I imagine, like MIQ, these are going to be hotly contested spots, 150 people in total, so fewer companies.
Yeah, absolutely. There'll be some competition for sure. So, look, we have a particular technical install with the product that we do. So if we go to a new geography or a new area, it's really important we work with our distributor to make sure that the first fans installed are done correctly and done well. So that's part of the argument that we'll be putting forward to go. But in saying that, we understand that there'll be lots of businesses keen to travel, and MB have to make the call on who gets that priority.
So what countries would you normally be travelling to?
We'd be travelling to Chile, France, Spain, Portugal and Italy, and of course Australia.
And so what have you been doing?
Lots of Zoom calls, like everyone else. Lots of phone calls and discussions lots of emails. So you just get on and you make do. And we've managed to appoint distributors and get sales and do those things. It's just not as effective as if you have the chance to do that in person.
As you would imagine, when we do a story on this, and in particular this pilot tonight, we've had a flood of feedback, and some people call business trips, and this is one that's come in, international jollies. What would you say in response to people who think you guys are all just desperate to take an overseas trip?
Well, I guess I'd come back to the example I gave where we have to provide technical support to the newly appointed customers that we have, and to make sure that goes well so that we can continue to develop markets and sell New Zealand products overseas, and not compromise that. So from my perspective, I don't think we're desperate to jump on a plane and go overseas because it's fun travelling for 27 hours. I think it really is quite critical to exporting businesses from New Zealand to do that.
So, Andrew, have you got staff who are prepared and ready to go, double vaccinated and happy to make the trip?
Yes. Yeah, we don't have a great number of staff that will do that. And, of course, the pilot is only for 150 people across 6 weeks anyway. So yes, we do have a number of people that are prepared to travel and have had 2 shots and are ready to go. But, of course, we've had to go through our own risk assessment of that as well. We're waiting for more details from the pilot program as well to see what it means to go to what geographies in terms of the isolation specifics when you get back to New Zealand.
Yeah, and so what consideration have you given to where would you put your staff when they return to New Zealand?
Well, I think that depends on the government's requirements about the self-isolation. So if it can be at home and that person can isolate on their own at home, and if that's part of the guidance from the government, then that's what we'll be doing.
Thanks for joining us this evening. That is Andrew Priest, who's CEO of Frost Fans, and as he mentioned, pretty keen to get on board with that pilot of home isolation for businesses. It is 19 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Door-to-door COVID testing in Auckland is being seen as a way to help Auckland out of a costly lockdown. Mobile testing vans have been visiting suburbs where the virus has been circulating and knocking on doors to offer tests and vaccines. A public health expert says it's a good use of resources and should be expanded. John Bond reports.
The average number of COVID-19 cases has been trending down, but in recent weeks, very slowly. 4 weeks ago, the average daily number of cases was 37. The following week, it almost halved to 19, but since it's been slow going, 17 the next week, and then 15 average daily cases in the last 7 days. Nick Wilson from Otago University says Delta's tail is stubborn.
Yeah, this tail is a problem, and it means that we've actually got to seriously think about a range of different approaches.
One which is already happening is door-to-door testing. In Auckland, there's a focus on 6 suburbs: Clover Park, Mangere, Favona, Otara, Manurewa and Mount Wellington, Sylvia Park. Nick Wilson says going street to street in at-risk suburbs is smart.
Given the cost to Auckland of this outbreak continuing, we really need to do absolutely everything that could help us eliminate this outbreak, and this is going to help remove access barriers. It's definitely the best way to focus resources on the communities where there's still cases.
It could be expanded further, he says, to stamp out this lingering virus. The government's being told there's another at-risk group of people who aren't getting vaccinated much and likely aren't being tested: drug users. The Drug Foundation says some users would be disconnected from society and the government's services. Executive Director Sarah Helm says only 14% of drug users who are getting treatment are vaccinated.
Perhaps we have some transmission occurring within the community of people who use drugs. We are really keen to see a renewed strategy that puts everything in behind trying to support people who use drugs to get vaccinated and tested.
Ms Helm says she'd like the government to work with services trusted by drug users, like the needle exchanges and addiction treatment providers. She says it's critical for the whole population that we reach everyone in the country.
If COVID-19 has taught us anything, is if you ignore inequality at your peril, because it will impact other parts of the community downstream.
The Ministry of Health and the Northern Region DHBs say they have and will continue to send mobile testers to parts of Auckland with COVID clusters. The Director-General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says they have honed in on suburbs they know there's transmission in and say people seem willing to be tested when offered.
There was certainly work done in Clover Park last week as part of or complementary to the wider testing that was happening there. I know there's another team's gone out into another suburb today to test some streets where there have been some cases located.
Health teams are also offering COVID jabs at the same time, with registered vaccinators on board just metres from someone's door.
As the National Party works to rebuild its reputation with the New Zealand public, its former leader has made a COVID comeback, criticising the government's pandemic response. But as political reporter Charlie Drever reports, it's unclear whether Sir John Key's war of words will help or hamper Judith Collins' precarious position as leader.
Sir John Key dominated headlines the last few days for his brash summary of the government's vaccine rollout and COVID response, calling New Zealand a smug hermit kingdom.
You know, I think bluntly, the government has not had a plan, and they actually do not have a plan that they can communicate to New Zealanders about when we're going to open, when they're going to fix something like an MIQ system, which is leaving huge numbers of New Zealanders stateless. And frankly, all they have actually done is lock us down.
Political commentator and former National Party staffer Ben Thomas says these comments could help clear the way for National's policy on the border. But he is unsure if Sir John still has the same influence as he did when he was Prime Minister, and if his so-called second coming will ultimately help the party.
But he has a long history of persuasion, of trustworthiness, and so I think the national leader, Judith Collins, will be very glad to see someone of his sort of status, opening up a critique and a debate about the government's policies, which, perhaps the National Party in Parliament have not been successful in doing.
However, there is also a risk of Sir John stealing current leader Judith Collins' thunder, if what these Wellingtonians think is anything to go by.
When he was in charge of National, it was pretty good. I'm not a huge fan of Judith Collins.
Yeah, Judith seems to trip herself up on her own words every week. So, it doesn't give you the confidence.
She's just kind of coming in and taking a very critical stance and appealing to quite a small contingent of people.
Oh, that's a hard one. Probably John Key would be better, yeah.
Yeah, that's a tough choice. Yeah, anyone but Judith?
Sir John said he had not spoken to Ms Collins before releasing his plan, but had done so after the fact. Judith Collins and John Key's relationship has been far from smooth sailing over the years, as even Ms Collins pointed out in her autobiography. However, when asked if John Key is acting as a pseudo-opposition leader, Ms Collins disagreed, saying he is just expressing the frustration she and others feel.
There's really no plan to open up New Zealand to the world. There's no plan to open up Auckland at the moment to the rest of New Zealand. So what he's doing is just expressing his views. I actually welcomed his comments.
But she didn't completely agree with his choice of words to describe those frustrations.
I certainly heard the term hermit kingdom, which is something that I've read in I think it was The Economist recently, a few weeks ago. It's certainly one that I probably used myself. There's a feeling of locking ourselves off from the world. I'm not sure about North Korea, though. I think that's a step too far.
And the National leader Judith Collins will get a chance to prove herself and shake off the ghost of John Key when the party unveils its plan for the border and vaccinations this week. But for now, the government is pushing ahead with its plan, today announcing a pilot for those travelling for business to isolate at home and confirming dates for quarantine-free travel for RSE workers.
Even the most ardent Beatles superfan doesn't have this recording, a cassette tape made by 4 Danish teenagers more than 50 years ago, which is being auctioned off in Copenhagen tomorrow. The BBC's
Hoon.
It took a long time to get there because of the snow and icy roads. As we arrived, everyone was leaving. The official press conference was over.
But the teenagers and a few delayed journalists were invited in anyway. Armed with a borrowed cassette recorder and microphone, young Mr. Hohen taped their encounter.
John asked me, "Where do you come from? A radio station?" "No, a school magazine," I said.
At that time, war was still raging in Vietnam. Lennon and Ono had recently made headlines, staging peace protests from their bed. The schoolboys asked how they could also play a part.
But how do you think that people like me can help you with making the peace of all the world?
If you can't think of any idea yourself, imitate what we do.
But this wasn't a typical interview.
It was very cozy. They were sat on a sofa with their feet on the table in woolen socks. It was super chill. They didn't act like stars.
At one point, Mr. Hohen says they joined in with a very Danish tradition, dancing around the Christmas tree. He then asked Lennon to play a tune.
I saw there was an old guitar in the corner, and I asked John if he could play.
The artist sang the hit, Give Peace a Chance. Then the duo performed an unreleased song called Radio Peace.
We later found out it was a song they made as a theme song for a radio station they were going to set up in Amsterdam. The radio station was never opened and the song was never released. To our knowledge, the only place where this song exists is on our tape.
After years in a bank vault, the 50-year-old cassette recording will now be sold at the Brun Rasmussen Auction House here in Copenhagen.
And a bit of feedback from Dave. This is on the interview with Ian Taylor, who's put forward an alternative plan for isolation. Kia ora, Lisa. I trust Sir Ian to do what he says, as I respect him. I'm sure he'll do the right thing. But rugby players, no way. I've been a young man and a rugby player, says Dave, and I wouldn't trust me to self-isolate. Thanks for your feedback, Dave. That's all we've got time for. The late news team will keep you updated throughout the night. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi a pōpō. And tomorrow from 5 a.m, First Up has the details of a record-breaking Godwit. It made the longest flight ever recorded by a land bird, 8.5 days non-stop from Alaska to New Zealand.
Kia ora tātou, RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Ko Sarah Thompson, tōko ingoa. Labour and National have both dropped 3 percentage points to 43 and 26 respectively.